Okay. Hi, Richmond.
Hi there.
Hi,
Oh,
good to
someone's
catch you reminded.
You're my early birds. Okay, I'm going to turn off the recording. Hi, Ethan. Okay, we're now officially recording. This is our Unit 3 document discussion night, and we'll be talking about the tricky issue of the founders' views on slavery. So we're going to get going. I'm not going to be sharing my screen on anything tonight. Oh, good. Annabelle is here, not to be mixed up with Anna. Okay, so we're calling you Annabelle. Okay, Anna. Um, I'd like us to think first. I want to know if anyone here has ever taken AP psychology or any sort of psychology class. Oh, good. Some of you have. Do any of you know what the term cognitive dissonance means? Yes, yes. How about Ethan? Can you share what that means? And we'll have Claire add something to that. What does cognitive dissonance mean? And why
It's
might it?
basically like when you have like an internal struggle like on a matter of like making decisions that's like all mental.
Yeah, you're not feeling like your actions and your thinking is the same, right? Do you have something to add, Claire?
That's exactly what I was going to say. It's like a
Okay.
discrepancy between your actions and like your moral standards for yourself, maybe.
Yeah, your moral standards and your actions, they don't seem to match. People might call you a hypocrite and things like that. Um, And why do you think I might bring up that term? That's to do with psychology, and it's kind of a modern term when we're thinking about the founders and their views about slavery. Did you see any cognitive dissonance in some of their views? What do you think, Sana?
I remember reading that Thomas Jefferson wanted to include something in the Constitution or
Or
Articles
the
of Confederation.
Declaration.
The
Declaration.
Declaration, yeah.
Mhm.
The declaration that slavery be a crime, but he himself had a lot of slaves.
Yeah, he had a lot of slaves. Yeah. Do you still have your hand up, Claire? Or is that just leftover up? Okay.
Sorry.
I didn't want to not call on you. Yeah. Can anyone think of some other? So there's Thomas Jefferson. He owns slaves, but had that big thing in the Declaration of Independence about how horrible King George was for pushing slavery on the colonists. And when he seemed to be taking part. Claire.
I think I might get the like order a little bit messed up, but
Mhm.
didn't Washington originally plan to release his slaves, but then kept pushing it back and back and back? So
Well,
like, and he also was going to purchase that piece of land with Lafayette to do sort of the experiment, I guess, with
experiment, yeah.
free
Yeah.
laborers, and then kept his slaves and kept like pushing back the release.
Yeah, I think sometimes there were people who had plans, they were going to put this into effect, and then they kind of, well, the time isn't right. The time isn't right. I think in 5 years the time might be right, and they kept pushing it off. Yeah. And Washington's original thing about when his slaves would be freed was not that they would be freed at his death. Does anyone know the details there, Bishop?
In his will, he stated that the slave should be released when his wife died, but then his wife really didn't want to have 100 people wishing her death, so she
Right.
released them all.
Right. I would be a little nervous if I were Martha Washington living in the big house while all these house slaves and slaves all around who knew they would be free once she died, because she could very conveniently die in the middle of the night. And yeah, so she decided to free them all. And one of um, one of Washington's problems was that he inherited slaves. He came into the marriage with a lot of slaves. His wife came into the marriage having inherited from her husband that died a lot of slaves. And then they all intermarried. So now, if, say, Washington freed all of his slaves, because he had no legal right to free her slaves, it wasn't, we often read about that, oh, women didn't even have their own property, and slaves they did. And he would have had to take away like a husband from a wife. Say, okay, you can't live here anymore. You're free. You have to go someplace else. And he didn't want to split up the families. That was one of his justifications for not doing something. Let's hear from Marissa.
I didn't totally hear the question, so I hope this is related.
It
But
probably
I remember reading a lot, like John Adams and Jefferson and Washington. They all had like personal correspondence about abolitionism,
Mhm.
but like that's like about as far as it went. It's just like letters and stuff like that.
That's a very good point. They weren't out making speeches to the public, to, 1,000 people in a big hall. Right. These were like private correspondence, private letters. Right. They weren't, most of these guys just didn't really want to be that public about it at that point. And Claire, do you have something else to say there?
I actually had a quick question.
Mhm.
If hmm, if you got married like Washington and Martha did, and they both brought in their own slaves,
Mhm.
would the like release date, if that's the way to put it, or like when the slaves would be freed, in most cases, would that be dependent on when the husband was going to free the slaves, or would it be completely separate?
I think my understanding, and I'm no lawyer of colonial or early American times. My understanding is that the wife had like legal obligations to handle her slaves, and that there was almost like her slaves, Martha Washington's slaves, would have to be handed down, inherited by relatives on her side of the family, that type of thing. Like they would do that. It would be their right to have those slaves. That I think that was the type of thinking. Um, but apparently you could, as a woman, she could free the slaves if she went through the processes that were involved. Um, but yeah, people didn't like to really take action on this. Let's see, Anna, you've got something to say. Got your hand up.
Oh, man, I totally blank. Never mind.
Did you have something to say or not?
I did. I mind blanked. Sorry.
Okay. We'll come back to you. Um, but I want to talk about, let's see. How many of you read the letter by John Adams? He was again writing a letter. None of these were like speeches or pamphlets. They were writing personal letters that are not going to be made public until some APUSH kids are looking at them. Jamie, did you read that John Adams letter?
Yeah, I did.
Yeah. Can you share a little bit about what you found there? And then I have an
It
interesting
was
observation.
it was him the if I remember correctly, the letter was him responding to a pamphlet that he was sent by two anti-slavery abolitionists,
Right.
and he was basically saying that he didn't support slavery either, but he really desired that the whole matter be approached with caution.
Hmm.
And he also, so he could be saying that the anti-slavery abolitionists could be too radical or too violent that could make the situation spiral out of control even further.
Hmm.
And he also dedicated a good portion of it to talking about other issues at
Hmm.
hand, other than slavery that he called more important than slavery. So it seemed like that was also part of his plan to get them to be more cautious. As in, it came off to me like he was sort of trying to redirect their interests.
Yeah, like let's not talk about slavery. There's a lot of other problems we're facing. Right.
Yeah.
Right. But I'm so glad you brought up and that you noticed it in that letter that this is John Adams is writing essentially a thank you letter, right? He had been given this book or pamphlet, and now he's thanking them. He's saying, yeah, it arrived safely. Thank you very much. And there are several other letters that are like that too. Like the one, did anyone have a chance to read? I don't think of the ones I had a chance to read. I saw it, but the letter from Patrick Henry. Did anyone read that? Okay, I'll read that one aloud because it's really worth it. He wrote that in 1773, and again, it was the same sort of thing. Someone else was sending him a pamphlet, a broadside, something against slavery, and they wanted to give it as a gift. And they wanted his opinion. What do you think of this? Patrick Henry. And it's a very interesting thing because I think these people, they were all big letter writers. I mean, it was like a lot of us, might write a lot of emails in a day, but they wrote a lot of letters in a day, probably several hours a day. These people would spend writing letters. Correspondence was a big thing. And how do you think, like with John Adams there, Jamie, was he polite? Was
Yeah,
he kind of gracious? Was he
he was
nice?
polite. He
Yeah.
definitely did seem very polite. I did look that in the link that sent
Hmm.
that the link took me to a page. The page specifically provided context and it said that a lot of the people who were against slavery at the time were Quakers and radical abolitionists.
Right.
And so it struck me that 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 was the audience he was speaking to, and he was still being polite because
Yeah.
he probably, like I said earlier, he didn't want the situation to become even more volatile.
Yeah. But he was really trying to have a civil communication. He was trying to redirect a little bit. Hi, Jacob. And but yeah, he's trying to be polite. And what if somebody sent you something unsolicited, like you didn't ask them to send you something for supporting some cause, but they sent you something. Maybe they're fundraising. Hi, Roanne. Um, and you had to write back to them, and you really didn't believe in this cause. How might you respond? Like, what sort of tone would you try to take? Bishop, what do you think?
I would probably say something like, "Thank you for your letter. It has proved quite thought-provoking. However, I am not able at this current time to provide funds."
Right, right. And so, yeah, these people were trying to be polite, and this was a topic that, most people, again, didn't want to talk about. They tried to avoid talking about the slavery issue because, well, why wouldn't they want to talk about it? Bree, do you have an idea?
Oh, I was just gonna say that when I was reading a book about like the slavery debates in Congress, they
Hmm.
actually had like gag laws in place to keep people from bringing up the topic of slavery during Congress.
Yeah, yeah. They actually had gag laws that said you can't talk about this. They thought it would be divisive. And you can see even in our day, it can be really divisive to talk about hot button topics with some people. You probably all have some relatives that it's like, let's not bring up any of that stuff when they're visiting. We're just going to try to be civil. Anna, are you ready to share an idea, a thought? And then Walter.
Yes, I am.
Okay.
Yeah. So I just think about like the contrast between centuries, like the alternative so polite, but also the fact that like the fact that people there just don't care how I sound typically, like people don't care what they say over the internet if as long as they don't see the person's face, which by the way is very messed up. Another thing in Hamilton, they actually aren't very polite. Like Hamilton, like the namesake, like the character in the musical is named after. He's totally burning the guy who's on the podium speaking. My dog speaks more eloquently than the. That was great. Seriously, that musical was totally perfect.
Great. Well, let me go to Walter. He's got his hand up officially.
Yeah, and answer the question about why they want to talk about slavery. I think they really didn't want to get rid of it because they realized how detrimentally economically it would be to them. And I think that kind of outweighed the moral hesitations they had about it. Um, because if you think about it, like if they'd freed like millions of slaves, that would take a big hit on the economy and like all these slave, plantation owners would be, you know, out of business and they would have severe, hardships economically and financially. And so I think that was probably one reason they sort of were okay with overriding their moral their conscience about it and just doing what they thought was most profitable, which I think that's why slavery lasted so long in the Americas and it took a whole civil war to end it.
Yeah, it might not have. I mean, it did. It's so interesting in our country to see that in the North, they did get rid of it. I mean, does anyone know much about that, the slavery and what happened after the Revolutionary War in the North and the northern states? Does anyone know much about that? Kaylee, let's hear from you.
One thing that I do know is there were some, like, they were given the opportunity, the slaves were, that is, to fight in the revolution, and they would be freed for fighting.
Mhm.
But another thing I was going to say about the not wanting really to talk about it is maybe kind of like an out of sight, out of mind. Like if we don't really talk about it, we don't have to think about it.
Mm.
It's happening, but we don't want to like start discussing it, and then it becomes a bigger issue.
Yeah, yeah, right, right. Let's just keep nice, Yeah, right, right. Um, and that makes it tricky. Bishop, you look like you've got your hand up. Do you? Yes.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
So it's kind of ironic that by not talking about it, they let it get bigger and bigger until it actually split the country apart.
Yes.
Um,
Yeah.
but I mean, in practical terms, it would have been very difficult to abolish slavery after the revolution
Hmm.
because from like, I don't know, Maryland down,
Hmm.
you're dependent on slaves.
Right.
Virginia, your most populous state, heavily slavery.
Hmm.
South Carolina, big economic center, heavily slavery.
Right.
Uh, and those are also some of the colonies that produce some of the greatest minds of the Revolution as well. You've got Jefferson, you've got Madison, you've got Washington, uh, all coming from those slave states, and to some degree being able to do what they did because they had their slaves. It's very curious.
Yeah. Right. They didn't
I
have to
read,
be out hoeing,
right. Uh,
plowing.
I last year for economics, I read, oh, what was it? I always think about this. Economics for Helen by Hilaire Belloc.
Okay.
Um, it's a great little economics book. It's not
Okay.
that hard to read, pretty short, but anyways, I digress. He basically says there are th three basic economic systems, all with their uh, pluses and minuses. And one of them is a slavery system. And he says
Mhm.
basically most of the people are oppressed, they're slaves, um, but it provides for a really good amount of stability, which debatable.
Mhm.
Um, but then it also allows an upper class to form
Yep.
that really outstrips classes in like capitalism or what he calls distributivism, which is basically like small farming, stuff
Mhm.
like that,
Yep.
small business. Um, so it is interesting to note that some of the greatest minds did come from.
Yeah. They had the leisure time to develop higher arts, right? And yeah, that's a very interesting point. I want to hear from Rohan because he's got his hand up. Rohan, take it away. Whoops. He might be. Well, here we'll hear from Walter and then we'll come back to Rohan. I think his oh wait, Rohan's ready now. You ready, Rohan? Okay.
Yeah, just to clarify, we're talking about why there wasn't earlier fight about slavery before the Civil War. Is
Yeah, well, we're just kind of talking about like noticing that in a lot of these documents that I'd given you, a lot of them were like letters. They were like private letters among these leaders, but they weren't giving speeches about this issue. And it was like really, to me, they seem kind of reluctant to even talk about it. So we're just sort of wondering why were they so reluctant to talk about it?
Okay, so I think the main reason why many of the founding fathers wouldn't, or founding fathers and political leaders of the nation, ability of the nation, like every they had just seceded from one of the most powerful countries in the world,
Hmm.
uh, using a great amount of foreign help, which France would obviously want compensation for, at least somewhat. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
there was there was the nation was already pretty much the nation was already very fragile with their, especially with their weak system of government in the earlier stages of it.
Yeah.
And I think they were trying to get the ball rolling, even if they weren't, even if they were very much opposed to slavery. They were trying to get the ball rolling for America to perhaps in the future do that. Because at the time, I think they recognized that any violent revolution, the second they gained their freedom, would only come to their detriment. Because
Hmm.
it would devastate the economy, it would devastate the population. Uh,
And their unity was so fragile. They would just split apart now. And then could be, I mean, the European countries were all looking at America and they thought they're not going to stay united. They'll fall apart and then we'll pick them off one by one. Um, it seemed like that would be the way it would go. And yeah, so I think those are the types of problems that John Adams is saying. We got a lot of other problems that are really bigger than this slavery issue. And just feeling like, we've got to get the country off to a decent start. And we'll worry about slave. I mean, it was like many of them were like, we'll worry about slavery in about 10, 15 years. I'm sure then we'll be able to solve this. Why did they think, I don't know if any of you noticed this in John Adams' letter, he mentions that he really thought it was a dying institution. It was not even profitable anymore. It's probably going to go away. Why did they think that? And why were they wrong? Walter, do you still have your hand up? Or is that just a leftover
Yeah, I
hand?
was wondering why did people ever consider like paying like either two options for the slaves. Either you can stay on the plantation, but the owners are forced to pay you, or you
Mhm.
can leave and do whatever you want. Like, people ever consider a solution like that?
I'm sure it was talked about, and that would be an idea that they um, might, they could just keep doing the same work, but now we'll pay them something. They won't be slaves anymore. They'll be, workers. Um, and I'm sure some people thought that. I don't know if there was ever much discussion about that. There was actually discussion in Virginia after the war about ending slavery, but it didn't go anywhere. Bishop, you've got a thought, and then Kaylee.
So I think probably the reason why Adams thought that slavery was a dying institution was because he thought that the Americans would follow the conclusions of their own logic. Because if you believe that all men are created equal, that must necessarily include black men. And if they are equal, you cannot hold them slaves.
Hmm.
Um, Not entirely sure why that didn't happen immediately, but as time went on, the less likely it was going to be rooted out by
Hmm.
the Southerners themselves.
Yeah.
Because we are creatures of habit, and when we do good things, we become better people and do more good things. And when we do bad things, we become more wicked and do worse things. So that's how you get up until the Civil War period, where they're full out nuts people in the South.
Yeah. Right. And Well, one of the reasons they thought slavery was dying out too, just to add to what you said, besides that they could see with a little more clarity that this really is bad. This doesn't match up with what we say we are as a nation, like from the Declaration. But they also thought, it's not even very profitable right now. Anyone know why that was? Why wasn't slavery viewed? We're talking like 1780s, early 1790s. Why was it not seen as being really profitable? And so therefore, people will just decide to do away with it. Let's see, Kaylee, do you have anything to say on that? Or I know you had your hand up already.
Yes, ma'am, I did. For it not being profitable, is it just because they've always been slaves, so you're not really making any more profit? Like it's not changing from them being paid to having them, like not having to pay them?
Well, it had to do with what crops the slaves were growing. What was the big thing like in the 1780s, the early 1790s? So let's hear from Rowan back in his cars.
The cotton gin was invented. It was it no.
Yeah, the cotton gin was invented in the 1790s. That's when it was invented. So,
So so in my understanding, the cotton gin uh made a much more easy way to process cotton once it was harvested.
right,
So so property owners needed a very cheap or free way to harvest mass amount of cotton.
right. And cotton takes a lot of hoeing and caring for the plants during the growing season. You can't just plant it and wait 4 months until it's got cotton on it. Um, so yeah, they actually stepped up how much cotton they were growing. Do you have something to add to this, Bishop?
See, I had forgotten that the cotton gin was invented that early. I thought it was like an 1800s thing. So I was
It was
going,
in the mid 1790s. Maybe somebody could Google and see exactly when it was. Um, but
um, I was going to say tobacco
yes,
because,
tobacco would have been the big crop this
and
time.
then in South Carolina, I believe they also grew indigo, which could
Mhm.
be
Yep.
fairly profitable, and then rice.
Hmm.
Um, but if I recall, in a biography of George Washington that I read, it
Hmm.
was already not tremendously profitable before the Revolution,
Hmm.
especially when you got the merchants who would sail up your river and offer you textiles and finished goods, and they would just rip you off because you couldn't make them yourself.
Hmm. Yeah, right. Yeah, and to go back to tobacco, what you mentioned, tobacco is one of those plants. I don't know if any of you do any farming of any sort or garden growing, but tobacco is known for being a plant that just ruins the soil. It like takes all the nutrients out of the soil, and pretty soon, 3 years the soil's worthless. It's not going to grow anything. And so people would move west. Okay, I'll start another plantation, 20 miles away, 30 miles away, 40 miles away. Anna, do you have something to add on this?
Yeah. I think I'm kind of interested in the fact that people just wasted the soil when they could have done something like the rotation planting method, where they
Mm-hmm.
would rotate their crops so
Right,
they
right,
could
right.
take different amounts of nutrients and restore them, so their soil would just get ruined so
There,
easily.
after the revolution in the 1780s, there was this new organization that started up in Philadelphia. Oh gosh, I can't remember the name, but it's in one of the DBQs for the next unit. I don't, oh no, I think it's in this unit. One of the DBQs has a document from that organization. It's like a little medallion. And no A pusher, whoever does that ever really knows what this is showing. The medallion says, venerate the plow, like, oh, the wonderful plow. And so people don't really know what to make of it. What it was this organization, this agricultural organization was trying to encourage people to do exactly that, Anna, to not ruin the soil, to not to do rotation of crops, to use manure from your animals, spread it over the fields, to leave some fields fallow for a season and just plant over here, that sort of thing. And that was considered, scientific agriculture. George Washington in the 1780s, after the Revolution, um, the he submitted a research paper about scientific agricultural experiments he was doing at Mount Vernon. He was very interested in that idea. And, they all loved it that General Washington had submitted something like this. But that was a big topic, Anna. And they were trying to convince the regular farmer. Like these were all sort of rich, as it were, aristocratic farmers who were starting this society. But the regular farmers weren't that interested. Nah, I'll just ditch this farm and I'll go farther west and start another and ruin that soil too. And then I'll just move farther west. That was what people did. And they wanted people to stay on the east, improve your land, and then we won't have that problem. But yeah, and apparently, I don't know, there's some of those tobacco prices went down. I'm not sure exactly why, but so tobacco wasn't seen as profitable as it had been in the earlier days of Virginia, say. Which is always kind of interesting to me, by the way, about tobacco being the big sale thing. It's kind of, to me, it's always like, oh yeah, some place is really making a killing in the market because they're growing poppies to make heroin or something, I mean, it's not a good, healthy substance. It's highly addictive and causes health problems and all that, but there we were. Let's see, Kaylee might have another thought here.
I was just going to say real quick that so the cotton gin was invented in 1793.
Okay.
And then also with saying that like John Adams was thinking that slavery would eventually die out, but those people in the South had relied so much on slavery for so long and had that greed from gaining the money but not having to pay. It's like they didn't want to have to switch from that. So just adding to it.
Yeah. Again, as somebody else mentioned that, you get in your habits, what you're used to doing. Right. Let's talk just a little bit. I don't know if any of the documents talked about it, but it's an important idea. We talked a little bit about the North, what they did to slavery after the Revolution, as a result of the Revolution. Does anyone know much about those changes in the laws about slavery in the northern states, what they did? Anyone ever heard of gradual emancipation? Okay, Walter, tell us what gradual emancipation is.
Well, gradual emancipation is basically the process of eliminating slavery, but doing it in a slow way and not snapping your finger and then boom, slavery's gone in an instant. More of a gradual process. Although I do believe that Vermont got rid of the got rid of slavery just immediately.
Yeah. Mhm.
But I think other states like Pennsylvania, for instance, had more of a gradual process, while in the South it just kept on continuing.
Right. They never went for that idea, but the northern states all, in the 10 years after the revolution, they all made some sort of law change or had court case, like Massachusetts, it was a court case to end slavery. But yeah, the gradual emancipation, the way they did that, like what would it be? How do you gradually emancipate people? Like you're almost free today, and tomorrow you'll be a third more free, or what does it mean? What is gradual emancipation? What's the idea? Walter, do you have another idea on that?
I think the idea was that it would go in like phases. I mean, I'm not 100% sure, but I think what they sometimes did was it would go in phases, and then I think sometimes they would start to pay people for a little bit.
Mm-hmm. And in most states that did this, like Pennsylvania, New York, New Jersey, it was kind of a new law in their new state that would say when a male slave reaches, say, 28, or when a female slave reaches age 18, if they're born after a certain date, then they would be free. So it would be sort of, you'd be a slave in your childhood up until adulthood, and then you would be freed. And those usually, what do you think would happen to, say, the parents of those young people who were growing up and then would be free? What about their parents? Often these gradual emancipation laws didn't say anything about the older people. They would stay slaves. Sometimes you'll come across things that'll say with horror that New Jersey still had 35 slaves on the eve of the Civil War. And what that probably means is they had some very elderly, 80-year-old slaves still living someplace. Because why would they say people couldn't free older slaves? What would be the deal there? And even some of the emancipation laws, like manumission laws, allowing people to free slaves, they would often have rules that say you can't emancipate, you can't free your 70-year-old slave. Why? Kaylee, what do you think?
Well, a couple things. So they could be very experienced and they were actually helpful to the household. Some of them could be very elderly, but I wonder if that would also encourage people who were over, like already over that limit where they couldn't have been freed to have children and then to be freed.
Oh, that's an interesting idea. Let's have one more child, honey. Yeah, that's interesting. Noelle, do you have some thoughts on this? Then I've got some.
I feel like a reason could have been like if like the slaves were emancipated or like too old, they might like not be able to create their own living and sustain for themselves. And then that could cause like social problems also.
Exactly, exactly. That was the worry that people would, in a sense, they'd say, oh, yes, I'm being really good. I'm emancipating all my slaves. And now they're just going to be a burden on society, and they're too old to find a job. They're 60 and they're feeble and they're sick, but I'm going to free them. I'm so good. So it was like a way to curb that. So like, okay, you owe something to these elderly slaves. You have to support them. And that was an argument that slaveholders in the South would make, that that the Southern system of slaveholding, and I'm not saying it all, I agree with this, kids, don't get me wrong, but they would say things like, our system is much better because our elderly slaves get taken care of. They have a comfortable living. We give them clothes, we give them food, they have shelter. And in the North, working in these new factories that are springing up, if someone's too old to work, well, they're just fired and they have nothing and nowhere to go and nothing to support them. So they would make, and Southerners, I think, did take that fairly seriously, that, yeah, we owe something. It's our duty to these older slaves to keep them on. Maybe we'll give them some little simple job, but we'll keep them on through their old age. They gave us a lot of their time when they were young. And I think they did take that fairly seriously. Let's see. And but yeah, you want to know one thing that happened with gradual emancipation, though? That say the laws were all different from different states, different ages of when they would be free. But say you had a slave who was 25 years old and he's going to be freed at 28. But you're basically kind of greedy. You don't really want to just free him and get nothing. What do you think you might be tempted to do? You live, say, in New York State. What might you be tempted to do? Bishop, what would you do? I'm not saying you would do, but would you, if you were that person and you would be tempted?
Are you saying maybe give your freed slave like a loan or something so you can?
Well, it's like let's say
I'm sorry.
the freedom age is 28, and you've got a
Okay.
slave, a young man who's 25.
Hmm.
So he's going to be free in a couple of years, And you're starting to feel like, boy, I'm going to be just out of everything. I'm going to lose a whole lot by this. And you can't sell that slave to someone else in New York. No one's going to want to pay. Slaves were not cheap. We always talk about, oh, well, it was free to the owners. Well, it wasn't free to buy them. And you're not going to be able to sell them to anyone else in New York because they're going to get 2 years of work out of this guy. So what might you be tempted to do? Do you have an idea, a guess, Naomi?
Sell them to the South.
Sell them to the South. That was a brisk business. So in some of these northern states that had these gradual emancipation laws and oh yeah, their count of slaves is going down, 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 down. It wasn't that they were all now freed. A lot of them were sold south right before they came of age. And those slaves would have nothing they could do about it. And do you know some of these documents talked about the slave trade? What slave trade are they talking about? What does that mean, the slave trade? Where are they being traded from and to? Roanne's got an idea. I can't see him. There we go. Yeah, what's the slave trade they're talking about in these documents in the 1780s and 90s?
You mean the trade importing them from other countries?
That's what
Yeah,
they.
that would be the triangular trade, wouldn't it?
Yep, 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 yep.
So the triangular trade, the slaves would come uh from from they come from Africa, and
Mhm.
I know that the 3 points of the triangular trade were North America, South America, and Africa. I
Or
don't remember.
it had a lot of points. You could go to the Caribbean, to New England, to England, back to Africa. It
Yeah,
was a more complicated triangle. It had a lot of
yeah,
changes. But
but yeah, the main point was it would be the slaves would be brought across from Africa to England, and then there would be like uh trades with rum and tobacco and stuff like that.
right. And so, yeah, that would be the way of bringing slaves from Africa over to the colonies. And most of the slaves really went to the Caribbean or South America, but um, you know, a million or so did come to North America. Does anyone know when that international slave trade is going to end? And none of these people know about it at this point because these documents are too early. So you may not know about this, but it's a good date to know. Does anyone know what Annabelle.
Hmm. Was it in 1808?
Yep, 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 yep. Because why was that year chosen? Do you know how that got?
Like when I think it was like the Dirty Compromise when they were trying to make the Constitution about like if the South would do something for the North, they would like postpone like abolishing anything with slavery until 1808.
Yeah, or abolishing the slave trade. No one was talking about abolishing slavery on like a national level, but they did say, and what the Constitution is, it's really interesting to read the actual wording. It's maybe someone could Google it and find it and read it to us here. It said until 20 years was up from the ratification of the Constitution, the start of the new government, we'd have to wait at least 20 years before anything could be done to restrict the international slave trade. Okay. It never said it had to be ended in 20 years. It didn't say Congress had to act or do anything. Congress could have just totally ignored that. But to his credit, Jefferson was president during that time, 1808, and he immediately, January 1st, he was putting in, recommending legislation to end the international slave trade. Can you all see how that had to happen first before you could even consider that way down the road sometime we'll actually abolish this whole system? Why would that have to happen first? Why is that like a first step? Kaylee, what do you think?
Would you have to just stop importing the slaves first and like purchasing them because then you're just going to free them? So that's almost like a loss.
Yeah. Yeah, you can't keep having more coming in if, oh yeah, we're freeing our slaves, bring in some more, bring in some more. You've got to do that. That was like seen as the first step. And that was really why that was important. And it was a big deal when they ended that. Suna, do you have a thought?
I think they also had to cut off the root of the problem, kind of.
Yeah.
And so there would only be, if they cut off the importation, there would only be enough slavery would only continue within the slaves who were already in the system. So
Mm-hmm.
it wouldn't grow, it would just stay the same.
Yeah. Did that happen, by the way? That it just, okay, well, we'll kind of freeze things. It won't grow. Or what happened? Noel.
I think like in my AP World classroom last year that like I heard that the slave population of the United States are like still growing from like the children that they're having.
Yeah. They had a lot of children who lived. Like in the Caribbean, they were continually having to bring in new slaves because most of the slaves would die quite young because it was such brutal labor. But here in the US, it wasn't quite as brutal, pretty bad certainly, but it wasn't as brutal, compared to the Caribbean, it was better. And people did have children, lots of children, and they lived. And so they didn't, in a sense, it didn't harm the growth of slavery one bit to close off that international slave trade, even though that had to be done to even think about um, ending slavery eventually. Kaylee.
And just one more thing with the gradual emancipation. When I read Never Caught about the escape of Ona Judge, when the slaves were in Philadelphia at a certain period in time, they could be in there for 6 months
Yeah.
and then they would have to be freed. So George Washington rotated them from Mount Vernon to Philadelphia. That way they wouldn't be there ever for a full 6 months.
Right, or more than 6 months, right? And he was kind of hoping his slaves wouldn't know that was why they were being taken back to Mount Vernon, every 6 months. We're just going back to see your family again. Help us out. We're going for a little vacation. It'll be lovely. And it was really so that they would not be freed. Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's fascinating. I'm glad you read that book. That's fascinating. Um, yeah, and that was a law that Pennsylvania put in place. And because Washington was there as president, he had to go along with those Pennsylvania laws. All the laws, they had been colonial laws for the different colonies, and now they're state laws. And that was why it was never possible or easy to say, okay, we're just going to say as a national government, we're going to end slavery. Because all those states would say, oh, wait, we have our own laws here. You don't trespass on our laws about slavery. We wrote the laws about slavery in North Carolina or South Carolina or Georgia. You have nothing to do with it. That's a state. That's our priority, our thing. It was kind of like the federal government for many, many years had no say over education in any state. That was a local issue. It wasn't considered something federal. And this was, slavery was always considered a state issue, but just because of habit, because that's how it had always been. And they continued that. Yeah. Let's think of someone else who, we're almost to the end of our time, someone else who we kind of got away from the documents here, who read one of the documents, responded to it. Do you want to share something that you gained from your document that you did that we haven't talked about, or maybe that connects to something we've talked about? I know it was all last week okay, Kaylee, let's hear from you.
I would just say one thing, and this may have been talked about right as I was jumping on at 7, but that Thomas Jefferson kind of almost hypocrisy that, he was like, oh yes, we should emancipate the slaves and
Great
end
idea.
slavery. And then you've got all these slaves.
Right.
And so, which obviously there are the economic issues. If you free all of them, then how are you going to make a living? But it's just very interesting.
Yeah, very interesting. And he did free a few of his slaves. And he also, I mean, it's the whole controversy. Did he have, a long-term, love affair or whatever with Sally Hemings, his slave? She had about 5 children, I think, and they were all very light-skinned. So some white man, and probably Jefferson was the father. He did let some of those children he didn't emancipate them, but they were so white looking. And does anyone know who Sally Hemings actually was, like in relationship to Jefferson and his wife? Anna, do you know something about that?
Wasn't she his first wife's half sister?
Yes, yes. Excellent, Anna. You know the gossip of US history. Yes, she was Jefferson's wife, was the daughter of a big plantation owner who had lots of slaves. And her father was the father of this slave girl in the household, Sally Hemings. So she was the half sister of Jefferson's wife. And Jefferson's wife apparently made him, when she was dying, she made him promise that he would never remarry. And she had brought over Sally Hemings, in some inheritance thing. She brought Sally Hemings over when she was a girl. And, but, and, the same thing had happened to Sally Hemings' mother. Her mother was the child of, the plantation owner and a slave mother. So by the time it got to Sally, she could have practically passed for white. That's the term, passing. She was very light-skinned, and the children, some of them, not all of them, but some of them could just slip off the plantation and become white because they looked white. You wouldn't know. And if they kind of went to a place where they weren't known, then they could just fade into society. And that's what about 2 or 3 of Sally Hemings' children did. And Jefferson never pursued them. So that's an interesting thing. Aubrey, what do you have to share?
Kind of adding on to what Kaylee said, I just noticed when I was reading the Thomas Jefferson PhDs, a lot of times he would like kind of avoid stating any outright views on slavery. Like I think there was one place I mentioned like in the colonies there's a great desire to abolish slavery, but he never really says anything about himself.
Yeah. We should, our nation should, but me, well, I have my debts, and yeah, and many of those slave owners they were deeply in debt all the time, all the time. Noelle, do you have some thoughts?
It's like a really random thought, like a question, but since like the slave laws said that people like follow their mothers, like uh position kind of as like a slave or like free. If a white woman gave birth to a child that she got with an enslaved man, would the child be technically free or?
Wait, can you just repeat that? Your mic wasn't working
Uh,
that well for my
okay.
ears anyway. Could you just repeat?
So if a free white woman had a child with an enslaved man, would the child be like technically a free person?
Yes, yes. That was the slavery would follow the mother. And why do you think they set up those sorts of rules? Like slavery follows the mother's station in life versus following the station of the father. Anyone have an idea on that? Anna, do you have an idea on that?
Why slavery followed the state of the mother?
Yeah, why does slavery in all the southern states, if your mother was a slave, you were a slave. If your mother was free, you were free. Why not
The
the
reason,
father?
yeah, the reason the fathers, because often plantation owners would have kids with their slaves,
Yep.
and so then he would be having like all these kids, and then like he had a whole bunch of free kids on his hands to feed and clothe,
Yeah.
versus if they were his slaves, he could do whatever he pleased with them, which I don't even want to talk about, honestly. It's really bad.
Yeah. Right. Um, let's see here. Kaylee, you've got a thought.
Oh, I was also going to say that the mother would be more likely to have to care and nurture for the child, and the father wouldn't be able to do that as well.
And yeah, that's a good point. Right. It's that, they don't want the father to be having to take care of a baby. Um, Abigail, do you have a thought? Oh, it's the middle of the night there.
Yeah, it's actually morning. It just looks kind of
Early
weird because
morning. Right.
yeah, the lighting's bad. But anyways, I think I've said it before. But like it's one thing, it's definitely because they relied on slavery, so they need a stable and cheap workforce coming in. And the social control is like a really important factor that kept it going.
Mhm.
Another thing is that it just kind of, in a sense, it really made every race stayed in their its respective racial group, so they don't have to blur the line between black and white, and that made them really kind of able to enforce all of the privileges, to preserve all of the privileges of the whites, and also like to preserve um all of the I guess oppression that they were able to get.
Mhm. Yeah, it was a color-coded system. And it did make it kind of funny. Like, what do we do with these slaves? Because they were born of a officially slave mother, but they look pretty white, it was tricky. It did blur the lines. Noelle and then Claire.
I wanted to add that like people are more likely to like follow their mom's like build behind it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so like if someone's mom was like a slave, it would like make them more like empathetic to slaves, and like if they become white men, it could like cause like troubles and like problems because there could be like free men who are like really strong abolitionists.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Interesting. Um, they Another thing is, how could anyone prove who was the father of a slave? No DNA testing in those days. You couldn't prove it, and they didn't try to. Um, it was an impossible task. You could make claims, you could start rumors, but you didn't know, you couldn't prove who the father was, but everyone knew who the mother was. The mother gave birth. She was pregnant. We know who the mother is. The mother's identifiable. And so that was the way they decided to do it. Claire, you've got some thoughts?
That's actually exactly what I was going to say. I
Oh,
remember we
I'm
talked about
sorry.
it a couple classes ago. That's okay. Yeah, there's no way to do like a DNA test or anything, so can't know.
Right, you couldn't know, but you knew and so the slave owners they were free. They could do what they wanted, right? Yeah. Okay, we just got a couple more minutes. Is there anyone like Jacob or Jonathan or Darren who haven't had a chance to say anything, who want to get that extra 100 points now for yourself? Do you have any thoughts on what document did you do, Darren? Do you remember?
For my PSDA,
Yeah,
I can find it. I honestly kind of forgot.
I can look it up too.
I did the one on Thomas Jefferson addressing King George's rejection of the abolishment of slavery.
Okay, okay. What thoughts did you have on that?
Yeah, that's pretty interesting. I thought it was interesting how specifically Washington mentioned that at some point in his letter that slavery was unavoidable. I mentioned that I think there's one common sort of belief at the time, at least among some people. I think Jefferson was one proponent in this later on as well, where they morally believed slavery was wrong, But economically, they thought that would be catastrophic to end slavery because of, I mean, it was a huge proponent of the economy, and it had obvious moral issues.
Hmm.
Um, so that's one interesting point. I think I don't know if George Washington explicitly supported that belief, but just an interesting thought.
Yeah. Okay. Good, good, good. Um, yeah, you looked at both the George Washington letter and Jefferson in the Declaration. Yeah, and they seem a little bit hypocritical. Um, yeah. And and again, an economic crisis would have befallen the nation if it had been suddenly abolished. Like the North could abolish slavery gradually, and it wouldn't cause turmoil because there weren't that many. But when you start talking about millions of slaves, it's another issue. It becomes different. Jonathan, let's hear from you.
Yeah, sorry, I was eating for the meeting, so I wasn't able to talk as much. But uh, let's see, I did mine on Richard Henry Lee.
Oh, I'm so
Um,
glad you did.
yeah, I did it mainly because in my AP Gov class, we had to do a debate on federalism versus anti-federalism,
Okay.
and I chose the character Richard Henry Lee. So it's
Okay.
kind of just familiar. But yeah, I looked into the claims that he made, and I think there were multiple levels that kind of made it even more profound.
Hmm.
Um, like as you looked into it, like uh for example, he was specifically he in Virginia,
Hmm.
constantly strutting into the House of Burgesses, which was a group filled with white landowning men,
Right.
basically saying that black people and African Americans were just as deserving as natural rights as any of them. Which, yeah, and the fact that he was proposing that in a bill is kind of hilarious to me.
Yeah, it is
So yeah.
amazing. And that was some of that before the revolution. He was pushing things like that. It's very interesting. Um, great. Thank you. And Jacob, let's hear from you.
Yeah, so the document that I chose was the letter between Patrick Henry and John Alsop,
Oh,
and it was
good.
presented by the New York Times. Yeah, so it's basically him talking about his views on the slave trade. And
Mhm.
so his first off, he talks about how Christianity, whose chief excellence consists in softening the human hearts and cherishing and improving its finer feelings, should encourage a practice so totally repugnant in the first impressions to the first impressions of right and wrong. So he basically saying, why is it that people who profess to believe in a religion that's kind, why are they you know why are they doing slavery? And so
Right.
he presents so he presents the question of why people who profess a certain religion would do actions that undermine of what that religion asks them to do. And
Mhm.
so his opinion is definitely negative, wondering how a modern enlightened society could condone such injustice and barbaric tradition, and he calls it biblically inconsistent and destructive to liberty.
Mhm.
So what I found kind of interesting is he goes on and talks about how terrible it is, and at the end he kind of says, "Oh, I'm sorry for talking so much. Excuse your humble servant, Patrick Henry," and he ends the letter. So that was kind of
Right.
funny.
And I don't know if that was the letter, if it was a different one, but Patrick Henry has another letter. Um, and I love this paragraph in it where he's had all these parts talking about how terrible slavery is. And then he said, would anyone believe that I am master of slaves of my own purchase? Like he bought them. I am drawn along by the general inconvenience of living without them. I cannot justify it. However culpable my conduct, however guilty I am for this conduct, I will so far pay my devoir to virtue as to own the excellence and rectitude of her precepts and to lament my want of conforming to them. So at least I feel guilty for not conforming, for not being, inconsistent. Let's hear from Rainbow.
I think it's interesting how all these people who we're learning about now are giving us all these opinions about like slavery, how they think it's bad. and then having slaves of their own,
Right.
and then like us still, or like people back then still believing in them, and then letting them have so much control over like Thomas Jefferson writing all these things for our country. I
Yeah.
think it's interesting, but yeah.
Yeah. It's like it's complicated. It's tricky. Let's see, Abigail, do you have something to share?
Uh, I've I've actually read like multiple documents on both Jefferson and Washington, and I think it's pretty, yeah, it's a pretty common topic. And now that Jefferson is kind of like a hypocrite, especially on the topic of slavery, because of the amount of protests he published about slavery, but then he owned about like over 600 slaves throughout his life. So he said things like on the notes on the state of Virginia, especially, I think it talked about something about Black people being physically and like spiritually inferior than the whites, and that I guess it's kind of revealed his internal belief that Black people are inferior than the white and needs to be taken care of, and that is, and he said something about that they can't coexist with the whites, and I think that really stressed the point when he talked about emancipation. I think he said when they free slaves, they're going to send them somewhere else, like anywhere from that's not where the white people are living in. So
Right.
like kind of export them to Africa and stuff. But yeah, it's just like internal prejudice, and also like later on when he wrote a letter that to another Black person, I forgot his name. I think his name is Henry, yeah, Henry Gregory or something.
Yes.
To yeah, someone who
That was a
argued.
person I think over in France or something. I remember one year looking him up. Yeah, go on.
Yeah. So he wrote back, he humbly acknowledged his misconceptions, but he never really appeared to change his mind, even in his later letters. It's just kind of like an acknowledgement. But yeah, it didn't really move him. I was like,
Yeah.
it's pretty interesting to look at him. Of course, it's inexcusable, but it's explainable, especially considering that he's from Virginia. His economic interest and all the privileges that he's able to enjoy came from and was built on the basis of slavery.
Right. Right. And I'd like to close here with just a little thought experiment because I think it's helpful to just get in the mindset of feeling like, why didn't they just get rid of their slaves? You know, it would have been the right thing to do. Why didn't they do it? And think about, I don't know if you're aware of this, but there's some, oh, what can you say, radical environmentalists who would say the problem with modern society today is the individual family automobile. It should be done away with. It should be banned because it's polluting. It causes, horrible accidents. People drive when they're drunk. They kill people. It takes up so much space, parking cars and doing all this, and it's polluting, and it's just terrible. Cars are the problem, and we should get rid of them. Now, if somebody wrote you a letter, maybe asking for funds for the anti-car lobby group, and they sent you a pamphlet or a website link, and you had to respond back, what might you say? How many of you drive, by the way? How many of you have your license or are learning? Okay, few of you. Okay. What would you say back to them? Anna, what would you say?
So I actually live in an area where walking everywhere is impossible. You have
Mhm.
to, like, literally, I live near a road where if you walk out in the middle of the road, like right out of my neighborhood, like take 5 steps out from the street, you could get squished.
Right.
And so, or like, or
Same
like
way here.
Route 3 is really, really bad.
Mhm.
It's notorious. Like I was talking when I was little, I'd talk it running away. Mom was like, walking on Route 3 isn't safe, so you
Mhm.
need cars to be safely get around. Also, my siblings and mom and I wouldn't have been able to go up and down the East Coast for New England, Florida. Instead of 17 hours, probably would have taken like a month or something, and
Mhm.
so that wouldn't have been a feasible summer vacation.
Right.
So cars are a very key part of transportation in our society, and like if we're gonna get anywhere, we have to have cars.
Right. Right. Sana, what would you say to someone who tried to get you to sign on for a petition to get rid of cars?
I would ask them what their ideas for replacements would be, because in my city also, it's like not walkable. There's too much traffic and stuff. And also there's a lot of scooters and motorcycles where I live. So I would ask them if they plan to ban those as well.
Yeah, would they ban those also? They're polluting, they're dangerous, right? Everyone could just sit in their house and be like COVID. Yeah. But you can see how you might say something like, "Oh yeah, you're really right. You've got some good ideas. Yeah, they really do pollute, and yeah, how many people get killed every year by car accidents? And yeah, this really is terrible. And how much wonderful, beautiful nature is covered over by roadways. This is bad." But you would probably say a but in there, like you did. But how would I ever get anywhere? But I need it for my daily life. But I I like my car. My car loves me. Me and my car are one. I mean, you could think of all sorts of arguments against that, but some people feel really strongly about that and are lobbying to get rid of the individual family car. And it's probably not going to happen anytime soon. I mean, like I know my daughter for a while before she and her husband had their own cars, they would use those, what are they called? Those cars that are parked around and you can, I guess, through an app, you can, get into them and use them and pay for it for, a couple of hours of use or something. And that's an interesting idea, that maybe people in cities might not need cars, but the rest of us do. Yeah, as a homeschooler, you probably couldn't get around without a car as a homeschooler, right? But anyway, I think that thinking of it with that metaphor, and I'm not equating owning a car to owning a person, but it's they're so entrenched, they're so much a part of our society, cars, that we just can't even imagine. It's outside of our scope of thinking to think how we would live and manage without cars, individual cars. We love our cars. And I think there's a little bit of that sort of sense for the people who own slaves. Again, I'm not condoning it, don't get me wrong, but it was that feeling like we're enmeshed in this system and we can't get out of it. How could we? Let's see, last final comments from Anna and then Daniel.
Yeah, so I think the interesting thing just occurred to me. They're actually co-simulators between the Revolutionary War and then the Civil War. Like one of them is like that there was a drastic change that people knew needed to happen, but there was people who were holding on so tightly they just couldn't give it up, so there had to be a war for it. Another thing is that they're also both related to people having their freedom. First, it was the American colonists, and later, it was the slaves. So I just thought that was interesting to think about.
Oh, yeah, there are a lot of interesting parallels. And yeah, and oftentimes war, awful as they are, they do bring about changes that could not have happened in peacetime. So that is a thing to keep in mind. Wish there were some better ideas out there for how to make changes without, war and revolution, but it does seem to happen. Okay, well, I think we're gonna go. Thank you all for staying here long. So we just went 15 minutes over. So if you stayed here till now, you can take how about an extra 25 points on your point count. And since we didn't say that, I didn't keep you up till midnight or anything. But thank you very much. You all had good ideas.
You nearly kept us up till midnight once, that 10 o'clock class. That was so tiring.
Sorry. I'll try not to do that again.
We will never forgive you.
If you see me looking up like this, I'm looking at my clock over there. So tell me to look up at the clock if I'm getting late. Okay, wonderful to meet with you kids again. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Bye,
Thank you.
class.
Early
Bye-bye.
birthday.
Oh yeah,
Happy
my
birthday.
birthday coming up.
Oh
Happy
yeah, happy
birthday.
early
Happy
birthday.
birthday
Happy
to
early
you.
birthday.
Happy
Happy
birthday to
birthday to
you.
you.
Happy birthday.
Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, Mrs. Richmond. Happy birthday
Happy
to you.
birthday to you.
I question, Mr. Richmond, I question, are you doing anything fun?
I don't know. We don't have anything planned for my birthday. I mean, I have a cake.
Don't?
I have a cake made already. It's frozen.
Already?
I made a well.
Why don't you get
My,
warm?
my husband. Well, I'll
I,
warm it up. My husband's birthday is in mid August, so I made this like what turned out to be a huge, like way too much cake for us to eat, and
You're
like
saving leftover cake for your
no,
birthday?
it's not
What?
like I made it in two different pans. So this is like a full pan that has not been, cut into. And
Oh man,
I
but
fr
lemon cake sounds so good.
yeah.
Ah,
Uh,
have you guys ever tried keto strawberry cheesecake?
that sounds really good.
Morning, the one my mom made for my birthday, for my dad. It was keto for a while, and my mom made a cheesecake that he could eat. Tasted terrible. I threw for a shot at keto cheesecake. It was so bad.
Oh dear.
It was
Yeah,
funny.
some of those.
Happy early birthday.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Okay.
Uh,
We should
yeah,
have a party,
Mrs.
Richmond, a
Well,
birthday party.
Yeah, we could have an APUSH birthday party. Well, we will be meeting next Monday, so the day after my birthday, we can have that be my birthday party too.
I would come. I think I would try and come there, but I'm having an EEG in my head, so I'm not sure. You're gonna see with a whole bunch of wires coming out, so it's gonna look like Frankenstein or something.
Oh, that would be fun. We would enjoy it. That would be great. We will not
Yeah,
make fun of you.
also got younger silly to drag along everywhere. So
Yeah, you can't
I have a question, Mrs.
Frankenstein that.
Richmond.
Yeah?
Okay, so I came in late today. I came in around 8:50, so my participation points, I think besides from speaking.
You're calling in from China. You get full participation points. Full
All
time.
right, thank you.
You made
Yeah,
it
I
up.
was like,
That's great.
I can go back and watch the archive and get the 75
you
when
made
it's
your
set.
you made your guest appearance, Abigail.
Yeah, we were very glad to see you. Don't worry about
Thank you.
Yeah.
I'm honored.
Okay. Okay. So,
Abigail, go back to sleep. It's too
yeah,
early.
you go back to
Didn't want to
sleep.
drag myself out of bed this morning, honestly.
Thank you. Thank you. I need that. I'm so
Okay.
Good
sleep
night,
deprived.
Abigail.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Good night to you
Bye,
too.
thank you. Night.